guys doing?
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't very enthusiastic. How are you guys doing?
Oh, yeah.
I accept that. That's good. Like Bruno said, my name's Kirralee with 2 R's. I am on staff here with Chi Alpha, and last week I spoke on part of the Beatitudes, taking on from Jenny's wonderful work. And this week I'm continuing that. And so, has anyone been enjoying our series so far? I've been enjoying it too. Bruno's really been enjoying it. I've been encouraged, I've been challenged, I've been convicted all at the same time, and it's been a great time. But if you're new, or maybe you forgot, we are walking through the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5 through 7, and it's one of Jesus' main teachings during his ministry time here on earth. And we are using the Bible Project as one of our main resources on this teaching. And so if you want to re-listen to the content of these messages, or just you've forgotten something, I encourage you guys to go find their podcasts. I'm sure all streaming platforms, they should pay me for saying this, but you can go find their podcast and take a listen. But recently, in the past couple weeks, we've been walking through the Beatitudes. We talked about the first triad and the second one. And these Beatitudes are 9 statements that are, I feel like we should know this at this point, about the surprise identity of the people that God is calling to usher in his kingdom. It's up there, yeah. And so a couple weeks ago, Jenny talked about what it takes for us to truly understand what Jesus is saying in these 9 statements. And the first thing is that we must know that the kingdom of heaven is near. And the second thing is that we must accept that these 9 statements are going to bring a reversal of our value systems. Things that maybe we think are important might not be. A certain way we think we should do something might not be the way that Jesus is saying. And so last week, we talked about the character of the type of people that God is calling to be part of his kingdom. And we saw that sometimes this character isn't what society would value, and it's not something that we can produce on our own, but instead Jesus works in us to transform us into people of this character. And one of the character traits we talked about that really encompasses, I think, a lot of these Beatitudes is people who hunger and thirst for right relationship around them. And so as we step into this next section, the last part of the Beatitudes, we'll see that if you long to see right relationship around you, if you long to see the world made right, if you long to love other people like family, and if your motivations are pure, then you will experience things that Jesus is about to talk about. This third triad is going to build on the first 2, and so if you weren't here, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and refresh your memory. But in this triad, get ready for conflict, for difficulty, for pain, all the good things. And if you're going to really become part of the group of people who are going to usher in the kingdom of God, then we have to accept that these things are going to come along with us. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to look at what Jesus is saying. So Jesus, I thank you for your word, Lord, that it is a lamp at our feet, that you guide us in who we are to become and what we are to do, Lord. So today, as we dive into your word and we read and we learn, would you open our eyes and open our hearts to receive what you have, Jesus, as you call us to be people who are making peace. I ask that we would not just be hearers, but we would also be doers of your word. Give us the strength to be obedient of what you ask us, and open our ears to hear what you have. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so here's the last triad. It's Matthew 5, 9 through 12. I won't pick you again. Gabriel, do you want to read it for us? You can say no. Do you want to? You said you can. Okay.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of the righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Thank you. Doesn't this sound exciting? Who's excited? Me. Great. So like I said, this last triad, it builds on the second triad that we talked about last week, because part of making a right relationship with people around us involves making peace. And so Jesus opens with calling us to be peacemakers. And so the first one is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Or, as we've learned, the good life belongs to the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. So what does peacemakers mean? Peacemakers is a compound word. Any English majors, English ed, something? No one. Oh, no, you're not. No one? Wow, that's surprising. Anyway, it's a compound word made up of two Greek words. I hope I say these right. The first one is irene, which means peace, and the second one is poies, which means to make or to do. So when combined together, it means peacemakers or peace doers. So peace, the Greek meaning of peace here, implies this condition of law and order that leads to prosperity, and it leads to human flourishing. And biblical peace, as Jesus is using it here, it's not just the absence of conflict. Nothing's going wrong. It's not that. More than that, it's the presence of harmony. This biblical peace is an ordered state that it must be worked towards. Any physics majors? No. Wow. Anyone will know the second law of thermodynamics? Maybe engineers would know. Zach. Oh man, come on. You just failed your test. Anyway, this is what it says. Entropy, which means disorder, of the universe always increases over time, which means everything is always getting more chaotic over time. I mean, not just on a molecular level, but on a human level. Look at the world. We're always getting more chaotic over time. And so peace here is something that you have to actively work to create. And it just doesn't mean I'm not going to get involved in conflict. That's not peacemaking, that's peacekeeping. Peacemaking is, I am actually going to get involved in conflict. I see a lack of peace, and my job is to get in there and to turn it into something of order. So to make peace means to be present in the midst of arenas of conflict so that you can introduce the ethic of Jesus as a way to solve these conflicts. I think it's pretty funny that Jesus is telling this specific audience to be peacemakers, considering the environment they were living in. They were in their ancestral land. They had all been born here probably and grew up here, and they were just, trying to make a living. But they had been occupied by a military from a foreign land. And this military ruled them, even though they didn't know who they were. These foreigners were the Romans, and they determined everything about how they were supposed to live. And they certainly weren't treating them fairly. They taxed them more than they needed to. They mistreated them for labor, and all these lists of things that they did wrong to them. And maybe we experience some level of this. We might disagree with people in power. We might disagree with policies that we have. But at least for us, we're all citizens of the same country. Our president is an American. You're an American. Now imagine if it was someone from a different country that's your president. And on top of that, they're ruling you with violence. How would you feel? Can you imagine the people's reaction when Jesus is saying, all right, y'all, you might be feeling this way, but you need to go and make peace with these people. My reaction would be, hey, Jesus, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know what they've been doing to me? And you're telling me that I have to go and make peace with these people? And so why is it crucial that this audience understand the way that Jesus is saying we should make peace? And why is it important for us? I want us to take a look at who Jesus exactly is speaking to. In his audience, there would have been about 4 types of people, 4 groups of people, and all of them would have had different ideas of what it means to make peace. The first group would have been the Sadducees. Maybe you've heard this name before. But these were the elite of society. They owned a bunch of land, they were wealthy. But they were also willing to collude with Rome, which was the governing power, so that they could maintain the power that they had. They may not have been pleased with what the Romans were doing. Maybe they might not even have agreed with how they were governing the land. But just so that they could keep their power, they were fine. These people thought that Jesus, through the way he lived and what he was saying, were disrupting peace, so they decided, what are we going to do? We're going to kill him. You could think of them as power-hungry top dogs of like a specific denomination or something. But they made peace by being aligned with whatever power was ruling the land, with the motivation of keeping their wealth and status. The second group was the Pharisees. You might also have heard of them. They were committed to helping people follow the law, the Torah. They respected the Bible, they respected the traditions that they had grown up knowing, and they were influential people in their city. You could think of them as like a local pastor. They had interactions with Jesus, and they disputed Jesus, because he didn't always follow the law the way that they thought that he should. So they made peace by following the law and keeping traditions, and they didn't want to give up their ways. The third group that might have been there would have been the Essene community. So these were like hermits. They were separated from everyone else. They moved to the bushes, and they were dedicated to a strict law-following way of life. And then they separated themselves from people who they thought weren't following the law. They dealt with conflict by getting away from it and by praying and praying that God would come and he would cleanse the land. And so they made peace by ignoring and escaping situations of conflict that they didn't want to get involved in. And finally, the fourth group that could have been there were the zealots, the hotheads, the militant faction who were all with their pitchforks resolving conflict by violence and by war. Whether it was their words or their actions, they were just so angry at everything, and their answer was war. It's interesting because they weren't just opposed by the Romans, they were also opposed by all the other Jewish people. So no one, absolutely no one except themselves liked them. And they made peace by reacting in anger and by being judge, jury, and executioner. It's interesting to think about where we would fall in these four groups. Or maybe you have your own way that's not in these four. I can tell you mine. I would probably be part of the Essene community. I hate conflict. I don't want to be involved. When I see conflict, I run the other way. Or I ignore completely that there's something happening most of the time. Where would you be? Don't tell me. Tell yourself. What's common about all these groups, though, is that they valued something they had more than they valued the way of Jesus. They valued something they had more than they valued peacemaking the way Jesus was teaching it. For the Sadducees, they valued status and wealth. For the Pharisees, they valued knowledge and being right. For the Essene community, they valued following the law and a life of ignorance. And for the Zealots, they valued anger and violence. So taking into account how Jesus has just defined peacemaking, each group would have had to give up something that they valued so much to choose this new way of making peace. And like Jenny said, Jesus' teaching was bringing a reversal of what they thought was important, what they had treasured and valued, not just to them, but also to us. Because making peace Jesus' way, it will call us to give up something we hold dear. And it will call us to turn away from a familiar way of doing things and choose his. And it may also result in unexpected consequences. And so the next two Beatitudes, they highlight some of these consequences. And Jesus is saying that when we live as peacemakers, the way that he's teaching, this is what we're going to experience. This is the part where you read, and at least for me, you start to question, I don't really know about this whole good life thing. How about we just work with, the okay life, the good enough life? I don't think we need to get to the absolutely good life. Because what you're about to say next to me, I think is a bit much to ask. So what does he say? He says, the good life belongs to those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. See, making peace Jesus' way, it's different. It goes against the grain of what we know sometimes and what we see around us. And because it's so different, it can shock us. We see that with Jesus' teaching, not just this one time, but over and over again in the New Testament. Jesus is teaching a people one thing, and they're like, there's no way, that's not what we learned. Crucify him. It shocks them over and over again. And I've been shocked by it over and over again in my life. And sometimes it's great to be shocked by it. Sometimes you're like, what is going on? This summer, I found out about an unfortunate situation in my past when I was in high school. It was a situation that was absolutely wrong, and it should not have happened, and I hope it never happens to anyone. But when I found out, I started to feel very angry, and I was hurt, and I was disappointed at the person who had done this wrong. And my trust was broken because I had looked up to them for a long time. And I felt this need that there should be justice for the wrong that they've done. And I was sitting there feeling all these emotions and getting so angry. And then I felt a foreign or perhaps unexpected thing. I felt compassion for this person who had done the wrong. And I sat there when I realized what I was feeling. I was like, what is that doing there? It should not be there. This person has done one of the worst things you could do to a person. And I'm feeling compassion for them. And for a long time, I wrestled with it like, what? Am I wrong to feel compassion? I should just be angry. Why am I feeling compassion? But that's Jesus' way. It shocks us. That's how Jesus feels towards us when we do wrong. He sees what we've done, but he still feels compassion for us. And it doesn't just shock us. It shocks people around us. When Jesus talks about this persecution, we can think that he's talking about persecution that's coming from the people we're trying to make peace with because they've been persecuting us. But no, persecution comes too from people who don't think that you are making peace the right way. Just because it's so different from what they know or what they've expected, that when you go against the grain and do it Jesus' way, they're shocked by it, and it leads to persecution. And Jesus is saying when we face that, let's expect it. We shouldn't be surprised. And as he's teaching this, he's describing his own experience. Because of Jesus' way of doing things and the teachings that he gave, we see him chased out of his own hometown. Could you imagine being chased out of your own hometown? And then we see him persecuted to the point of death. Because the teachings he was giving were different from what the people grew up with. They were different from what they were expecting. And so they persecuted him. The person that he was, not just his teaching, the being of Jesus. It was not the Messiah that they were expecting. He was this humble guy, and they were expecting this majestic ruler. And so they said, we're going to kill him. We see through the life of Jesus that this persecution looked like this for him, and it could look like this for us. But also in this last beatitude, Jesus mentions other ways that we might face persecution. On top of that, Jesus tells us how we should respond in light of this persecution. And you'll never believe what he says. He says the good life belongs to you when people insult you, when they persecute you, when they falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So he describes different forms of persecution we might face. He says they will insult you, they will say evil things about you, you will be misunderstood, your reputation will be in the dirt. And to be clear, the persecution that we're talking about here is because of living Jesus' way. It's because of doing the right thing. And it's because of implementing the ethics of God's kingdom into our daily lives. Because sometimes people can dislike you for good reason. If you're being unkind in the way you communicate things, or maybe you're gossiping instead of going up front and solving your problems with a person, if you're maybe selfish, or maybe you're self-centered, you can expect a negative reaction from people, but this is not persecution. The Bible Project puts it this way, that what Jesus is saying here is no matter how good one's intentions are in trying to be faithful to Jesus, in the ethic of the kingdom, that doesn't mean that you will be well received. In fact, expect people to misunderstand you, to not care to understand you, and for people to make fun of you or actually harm you. So I want to invite the worship team up. And knowing what Jesus is saying here, I ask the question, so then is persecution the good life? Why would Jesus possibly be saying that to face these things is the good life? Is he actually teaching that our response to this persecution, this is working. Is he actually teaching that our response to this persecution is to rejoice and to be glad? The answer is yes. In the midst of persecution for making peace, Jesus says that we are experiencing the good life, and that this is cause for us to rejoice and be glad. Rejoice and be glad here is talking about having exuberant joy, not just on the inside, but also on our outside. We can show that we're living the good life. It has this connotation of celebration. We're celebrating because we're facing persecution. That's not a normal response. It's not my first response when I face persecution. But this response of being joyful, celebrating, and being glad, it's an act of faith, and it's an act of hope in God's redemptive power that we may not always see in the moment. When we face persecution, it doesn't look like a time for us to rejoice. Much of the time it's to sulk and to lament and to say, why in the world is this happening? But because we know Jesus, we know that his death and his resurrection, they give us hope and they give us cause for joy. Even as we go out into arenas of conflict and we're trying to live out the ethic of Jesus, and we get shut down and we get hurt and we're persecuted, we choose to rejoice and be glad. Though it might be difficult, honestly it will be painful, we choose to do this because we know that for us, who live according to the way that Jesus is saying, there is a reward. The end of this says, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. When we live out the Beatitudes and we're working towards peace and we face persecution, we're not just doing all that in vain. We're doing that as we work towards this heavenly reward. We're not chasing our reward here on earth. We're not looking for a gold star. We're not looking to win the Nobel Peace Prize. We're not looking for people to thank us and congratulate us for being good people. And we're not even looking to show that we are the most spiritual of them all. These rewards, they may seem like they matter now, but they're not what Jesus is saying is important. These things that seem to be rewards that are worth chasing over. Being a good person, it seems worth chasing over. But does it count in heaven? So why don't we do the things that count? Which, according to Jesus, is being in right relationship with people. It's making peace. It's choosing to live for the kingdom of heaven despite persecution. And as we do these things, here's the reward. That we experience the complete and the perfect life that we will receive one day in heaven. Jesus exemplified that while on earth. When we treat each other according to the ethics of the kingdom, according to the ways that we've learned in these 9 past Beatitudes, we get a taste of heaven while we're still here. We get a taste of what our reward is going to be. I don't know about you, but when I encounter Jesus, and when I think that this is going to be my everyday, I can't wait. I can't wait to meet him in heaven. So when we decide to be patient, when we decide to be loving, to be generous with others, we also immediately begin to receive the eternal life that we see in Jesus. Jesus is inviting us to receive the rewards that are in heaven right now by being peacemakers, by living out the ways of the kingdom of heaven, and by spreading this life to others around us.